I'm Lucy Lacoste from Lucy Lacoste Gallery. It is a pleasure to introduce you to Lily Fine of our current exhibition, Lily Fine in Response to George Orr, June 6th through 27th. This exhibition traces the creative journey of this young artist to New Orleans and the Mississippi Gulf Coast as she seeks threads of synchronicity with the revolutionary Orr, the self-styled Mad Potter of Biloxi. Ultimately, she realizes that the best way to relate to him is to claim her own narrative and return home. Along the way, she observes Orr's interpretations of the female body from the male-identifying perspective and learns how hers might be different as a woman. George Orr, 1857 to 1918, often considered the first art potter in America, is known for his flamboyant, wild pots, breaking the boundaries of symmetry. Ahead of his time, he paved the way for contemporary artists such as Peter Volkas and Arlene Sheckett to tear into the clay and deconstruct the vessel. Orr's pots have a free sensuality, often bordering on the erotic. They can have a visceral, direct sexuality, as can be seen in his famous money bank, the front of which is a vulva and the back a breast. Lily Fine's sensuality is intuitive, organic, implied, naturally reflecting the outer female sex organs. This is evident in her Vulva series. The edge is important. The pots reflect the way she touches and pinches the clay, as if the clay were skin. Now I'd like to turn this over to Lily Fine, who will tell you more about the exhibition. But before I do, I just want to say that out of regard for the important protests occurring across the country and to amplify voices less heard, Lily Fine and the gallery are committing 18% of sales from this exhibition to the Boston chapter of Black Lives Matter. We invite your support. This takes all of us. Thank you. And now, here's to Lily.
Hello, my name is Lily Fine, and I am the artist behind A Response to George Orr at Lacoste Gallery. A little bit about my background. I grew up in Newton, Massachusetts, not far from the gallery, and I started doing ceramics in high school and basically just never stopped. I went on to study at Syracuse University, and after that did many residencies, ones in Montana, Japan, Minnesota, upstate New York, and the places that I've done residencies have very much informed my work, whether it's like the natural environment or a research project like this one where I went to New Orleans to be closer to the work of George Orr, which is both at the New Orleans Museum of Art and in Biloxi at the Orr O'Keeffe Museum. And my initial research plan was to just focus on form and to go down and draw a lot of his work. I've always been drawn to his work and notice similarities in certain motifs, folds and twists and curves. So to start off, the After Orr vase, which is part of the Ghost Objects series, I drew at the New Orleans Museum of Art and also added my own elements like the stippling that I often use. I call these objects ghost objects, ones that were really directly referencing Orr's work, because they kind of feel to me a little bit eerie in that essentially I was attempting to copy the vase, but it has a whole nother feeling, I think particularly because of the pinching, and I like how the coil and pinch kind of makes the curves feel smoother, as compared to Orr's work, and how his curves exist in his vases. So with the ghost objects, I chose to make them all white, kind of almost as like an homage to Orr, like his work was so colorful, yet I'm inspired by it, but yet these are only like vestiges of his work. After Orr vase with vulval opening. This is another ghost object, one of my favorites of Orr's. It's been written that this piece was combining both male and female genitalia. The technique that I used was coiling and pinching, which is very different from Orr's. And I think that the the twists, particularly on these, feel very soft in the center of the piece, which I enjoy. I think that this piece was really helpful that I attempted to copy it in this way, because the motif of the vulva top really informed a whole nother series that I created, the Vulva series. So this was when I started to realize that copying these things and using that as a starting point would lead me to other endeavors. The next piece, teapot, light green with stippled exterior. On this piece, I like how the stippling follows the curves and the ridges and the ribs that I've created. That's something that I think the stippling has the potential to do, is like accentuate these curves, and as opposed to taking away from the other elements of the pot. I'm often afraid of overwhelming the pinch because it's such a delicate, subtle effect that I laboriously create, and putting another texture on top of the work to me sometimes feels counterintuitive. But I find that the stippling can have a positive effect in accentuating the form, like in this teapot, or in making the surface more topographical. This is the Vessel Vulva series with a teal interior and exterior. So, like I was just talking about the vulva, this one was one of the pieces in the series that was inspired by the Vase. And you can see how just kind of this ovular opening resides in this series. I particularly am attached to this one because of the holes, and that's something that I've played around with a lot in my work, is like breaking the interior from the exterior, or joining them, or making it less clear which is what. And I think this piece does that pretty successfully. And I think it's also interesting to think about given the theme of the series. I also played around more with color, using bright colors on both the inside and outside of a pot, which is rare for me, but something that I was inspired to do while doing this project on ore. Sculptural double vase. This is something that I started to do, the pieces with two openings, when I started looking at Mexican wedding vessels. So I started doing that separately, but then also began like tracing those forms in Orr's work, where he has a lot of pieces that have like two openings or even more than two openings. And I've always loved that because it's suggesting that there's more than one way for things to enter and to exit the vessel, but it all resides in the belly of the vessel together. And I also use the stippling elements on this pot. And just another thing that I wanted to do while I was in New Orleans was tackle making larger vessels. So that was fun, and also fun to drive up all the way from New Orleans to Massachusetts, where I glazed the work. Blue and Bruised. This is a piece that has a lot of stippling. It probably took me I worked on this piece for about 3 weeks, mostly doing stippling. Because it's such a monotonous task, it's also not great to just sit down and do it for hours. I need to take breaks while I'm doing it. And as I said before, I like how the topographical nature of this stippling becomes accentuated because it kind of covers the entire surface and makes the piece almost feel like a map or something. I also love the methodical and repetitive nature of the stippling, which is not dissimilar from the coiling and pinching. It seems that I'm attracted to these things that I could just go on and do forever and get very lost in. Goblet with scalloped edge. I started making goblets, I think, because I was living in New Orleans. New Orleans is a very exciting and thrilling city with a lot of leisure and excess, and it really relishes in that excess. And I feel like goblets are kind of like a symbol of like luxury in drinking. And I think that I kind of leaned into allowing the place that I was in affect the objects I was making, the type of functional objects, because that was something that I think Orr was particularly good at, was commenting on the chaos around him, whether he was directly involved in it or not.